one thing that I don't know the answer to is, how did you guys meet? How did you guys become collaborators?
It's a good question. I can't even remember that.
I definitely remember because it was kind of a serendipitous moment for me, but it was very early on in my writing career with NHL.com. So I'd been writing for many years, covering goaltenders just independently. And then in 2011, when the playoffs started, that's when NHL.com reached out to me and they were like, "Hey, we've never had like a goalie specific writer before. We would love for you to do some like early first round matchup, goalie breakdowns for the playoffs." And I remember one of the breakdowns was obviously Kari Lettinen when he was playing with the Dallas Stars. And so I think Mike probably came across his desk and read it and didn't hate what he read. So he reached out to me. I was, pretty popular online tweeting about goalies, and he just reached out to me. It was like a cold call. I just out of the blue, all of a sudden,
No way.
I saw a random number on my phone, and it was such a cool moment for me because I grew up in Dallas. So, that's where I got introduced to the game of hockey, was watching Stars games in the mid 1990s. So all these years later, to get a call from Mike Valley, who was the goalie coach for the Dallas Stars at the time, was like, whoa, did I write something wrong? Like, I hope I didn't screw up this report. And he's like, what's your background? Just asking questions about where I came from. And that's right away. We just clicked, he became a mentor of mine right away. And I asked him a bunch of questions, obviously, about Kari and training. And I think Mike just kind of picked up on my passion and my enthusiasm. And right away, that first conversation, I was just like, wow, this is so cool for me to have this opportunity. And Mike was, gracious enough with his time to give me the chance to, just tell him a little bit about my story and why I was so passionate about scouting goalies at the time. And pretty quickly, we just became instant friends and realized that there was a gap in some knowledge and some educational resources for goalies out there. And that's when we decided, hey, let's write a book together.
Did the book come before the Goalie Guild? And I think we'll talk a lot about the book, but what I don't want to slip through the cracks is you guys have also built up an incredible goalie community. And it would seem that, as much as the book is a resource, the humans in that community are equally as much of a resource for, I'm assuming, both goalies, but as well as people that coach goalies.
Yeah, I mean, I had started the Goalie Guild a few years earlier, and it was mostly just like a blog for me to post all my scouting reports. Like I said, I was doing this as a independent scout, really an analyst, and so that's where I kind of got my start. That's where I really got my feet wet, studying goaltending and making connections with individuals like Mike and other NHL goalie coaches, and so. Yeah, it was just a huge boost of confidence, like I said, to get a call from Mike and to have him genuinely interested in what I was writing and what I had to say about the goaltending position. And again, it seems like so long ago, but this was at a time when social media really wasn't prevalent in hockey, right? Like this
Yeah.
was early 2010s, late 2000s. So it was really like the first wave of individuals like myself, even having a chance to interact with pro goalies or pro goalie coaches. So I think it was that just right place at the right time. Like I said, I was always so passionate about covering goalies and writing. Those were my two big passions growing up. And it just took a guy like Mike to kind of give me that boost of confidence. And he said, hey, keep doing what you're doing. Doesn't matter if you didn't play at a high level. That's not what it's all about. It's just about the passion and being able to observe what you see and write it. So yeah, I think it was just a combination of those two things, the timing and then Mike giving me that boost of confidence. And then from there, our friendship just continued to grow. And as our friendship grew, so did the community that we were kind of building together with educating coaches and giving coaches that opportunity to continue to network and develop their skills as well.
Well, Mike, I'd be curious. I mean, you obviously, you played professionally, transition into being a goalie coach, but and I know that it's been a while since you've held that position, but how much has the position changed, the knowledge of the position evolved, and maybe how much of that has to do with simply creating a community where information gets transferred from equally passionate people?
Yeah, it's a good question. Um, Obviously, it's always evolving, and just to kind of take a step back with Justin, there's certain guys that you meet that are, they're just very talented. They can articulate what they see, right? And I had come from a world where I was working with Mitch Korn in Nashville's farm team Milwaukee, and Mitch is one of those guys, right? Mitch never played, but he had the ability to coach, to see the game at a level with experience that you usually normally just get when you played, right? And so I saw a lot of the similarities in Justin, how he had the ability to, kind of dissect goalies, almost that he played at a much higher level than what he did. So he was very talented, very passionate. Uh, and the thing that I liked the most, where I knew Justin was going to be good at what he was doing, is he didn't have a big ego. He was always looking to learn, right? And I think that is the key, and that is how the game evolves, is when people don't have egos. Because you can always learn. You can learn from everybody. It's not just learning from goalie coaches that have certain titles. Um, you it's the goalies themselves that develop the game, right? So
Yeah.
they try different things, and next thing you know, you've come out with a new technique, right? Um, so I think it's a game of trial and error, and it's a game of knowing that it never stays the same. There's always something you can do better. And that's the fun thing about the position, is that it's always evolving, right? And the moment we stop learning is the moment, you kind of put your own ceiling of how good you can get, whether you're coaching, whether you're writing, or whether, you're in the crease. So, I love the qualities that Justin brought to the table, and he kind of thought that way, and that's how we've grown everything that we've done, whether it's the books or the NHL camps that I have in Madison, or if it's the network symposiums that we did, was all based off of everybody, regardless of where you are, can get better, and we can all learn from each other. So that's kind of where we're at.
Well, it's interesting you mention, and we'll dive in more to the ego aspect of it. I've got some questions there, but when you talk about just that, there's always more to learn. When I was going through the book, the one thing that stood out to me is that, take any young goalie in the National Hockey League right now. If you were to go back, say, 10 years, 15 years, sort of the guts of their development, that if they had have latched on to a specific way of doing things early on as a young goalie, they probably don't end up where they are today, because the position has just changed so much. And even, I think for folks like me that, love hockey, watch hockey, maybe don't know how the sausage is made, so to speak, when it comes to goaltending, but just visually, it's apparent that the position has changed considerably. And so how, when you guys, I guess, look back in hindsight, what might be some of those fundamental changes or evolutions that have forced goalies to be open minded and to constantly look for that next thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the things that, one of, I guess, my mentors, a guy that I was fortunate to work with as a goaltender and then later as a coach, was a guy named Thomas Magnuson. Thomas is the
I talked to Thomas
goalie.
last week. Never met him before. Crazy.
Oh, did you? Yeah, wonderful
Yes.
guy. A
Yeah.
great, great human
Prince of a
being.
guy.
And, talk about a guy that doesn't have an ego. And he's always put himself to the position where he just wants to learn as much as he can. And he used to say that the game's like a pendulum, right? So it swings one way and then ultimately it starts coming back. And we see that in things like, before it was reverse VH, and that's all the guys would do. And then what happens, it swings so far, and then, the players have gotten smarter, so they start adapting. So then all of a sudden, and you see goalies getting hip injuries and groin injuries and all types of injuries. So now it all of a sudden starts coming back, right, the other way. And so I think the game evolves technically. The game evolves tactically. And I think the biggest thing is the mental portion of the game as well. And that's kind of where our books are all about, right? It's like being able to learn from those who have been where you want to go. On your journey to the, trying to get to the top of the mountain, you're faced with all types of obstacles, right? And you have all types of adversity that you have to go through. And each one of those phases that you go through, there's a lesson to be learned, right? And sometimes if you can learn those lessons from those who have been down that road, it's going to help you get through just a little bit better, right? And that's kind of the neat thing. It's like understanding that if you're a young goaltender, a lot of the challenges that you face, guess what? All these NHL guys have as well, and still do, right? They still get nervous for games. They still have bad nights. They still dwell on goals they should have been able to let go. But as we go down this journey, we start learning, well, what are some of the things that we can do to be able to navigate those waters?
My biggest takeaway, and again, I'm through the first book, The Power Within it, and I've got two boys, and I want my two boys to read this book. And they might not, but I think the one thing it signaled to me that in this thing that we all are so passionate about in sports, if you're a goaltender and you follow the principles in this book, if you latch on to personal growth, if you enhance your self-awareness, whether or not you ever earn a paycheck stopping pucks, it's going to have a profound impact on the quality of your life moving forward. And I think it really just, again, resonated with me is that whether you're coaching goaltenders, players, football, doesn't matter, is that we all have this platform where we've got young people's attention and this opportunity to transfer knowledge and experiences that are going to, shape the way they live the rest of their life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good way to say it. And that's literally like the mission statement that I think Mike and I had, is passing along that wisdom. And, I grew up in a really non-traditional area. I grew up in the middle of nowhere, Texas. I never had access to individuals like Mike or Tomas. So that opportunity to take the knowledge and wisdom from NHL goaltenders that have, like Mike said, literally seen it all, and be able to just authentically and genuinely pass along their wisdom, their knowledge, their experiences to the next generation, was a really big driving point for why, I committed to doing this with Mike. It wasn't just the opportunity for myself or us to, publish a book. It was goalies are desperately seeking this kind of knowledge. And they need to see firsthand that goalies like Pekka Rinne and Marty Turco and Tim Thomas, all these awesome individuals we've interviewed in this series, their development is very nonlinear, right? Like, it doesn't go in this straight, perfect line. Just because you're talented doesn't mean that you're going to just all of a sudden wake up and be a starting NHL goaltender. So I think for younger goalies to see, or goalies of any age really, to see that every single goalie that we've interviewed has this very nonlinear process of development. It's up, it's down, it's two steps back before it's any steps forward. I think brings a dose of realism to what that journey is like. And that dose of realism can really help motivate and inspire younger goalies that are facing their own challenges in their own way.
Well, I think that what you just said, if we were to take, and I don't want to suggest that, the Connor McDavids and Sidney Crosbys of the world, that their development's been linear. They've, no question, they face challenges as well. But I think what you just described is every athlete. And, frankly, anybody that's trying to do anything that's hard. But Justin, you mentioned you grew up in the middle of nowhere, Texas. Here's my observation on goaltending. There's no shallow end in the goalie pool. You are either on the deep end or you are on the side of the pool. Like, you're either, I mean, there's so much passion involved. How did you develop that passion early on?
It's just kind of like, I think it was right place at the right time. I was too small to play football, obviously, and that's the big sport in Dallas. And then all of a sudden, I'm 12 years old, and out of Minnesota comes the Dallas Stars. Like, all my buddies had no clue, right? So my buddies had no clue what ice hockey even was. I'd never experienced a hockey game in my life until I was 12 years old. So just the buzz of a new pro team, a new pro sport coming to the Dallas metro area, at a time when, I wanted to play an aggressive physical sport, but thought I was too small. Lo and behold, I go to that first Stars practice at the very first Dr. Pepper Stars Center in
Come
Valley
on.
Ranch. First two guys on the ice, obviously a goalies, Darcy Wakaluk, right, and Andy Moog. And Darcy Wakaluk, okay, is in this unbelievably sick all black setup with some green accents and a black mask. As soon as I saw it, I was just like, that's what I want to do. That looks like the sickest thing ever. That's something I can do. I can at least maybe stand there in the crease and stop some pucks. And so it was like out of grasp. It was so surreal, but it was also within grasp, because it was a new sport. No one knew any better. Like Mike said, growing up in Dallas, the one thing I never had was an ego, because it took me 3 or 4 years just to learn how to ice skate. So I think it was just the novelty and the newness and the fact that it looked so like cool to a guy that had never experienced a hockey game growing up as a kid. It was just, yeah, it captured my creativity, it captured my passion, my imagination. Um, and I was patient enough with the process to just keep falling on my face and giving up a lot of goals before I got halfway competent and could play in high school. So that was, I think, really just the origin was just the passion of seeing something so new, so fresh, in an area that was completely dominated by football. And all of my friends that I was with in high school and grade school, we just absolutely loved the experience of playing a completely new sport, that had otherwise been totally foreign to us. So that's kind of where it started for me.
So what's interesting about that, sort of the origin of this conversation, Steve Thompson, the head of goalie development for USA Hockey, put you and I in touch, Justin. And when he was on the show, he talked about how there was a real push to recruit more young goalies in the US. And that was shocking to me. Just looking at coaches that we talk to in and around grassroots hockey. And I mean, I'll just speak from I've got a 6-year-old that's in U7. If we wanted to, we could have 15 goalies on our team. Like when our team manager asks, like, who wants to play goal, my little guy is one of them. And so, how would you, for any say parents that are looking at this, or coaches that are in my shoes, how would you look at when young kids make that jump full time into goaltending? Because part of the reason I ask, it seems like depending on where you grow up in the world, that full time transition could happen when you're really really young, or it could happen when you're a teenager.
Yeah, I mean, it always depends on the individual and some of their, environmental surroundings. And I don't think there's one specific answer as in terms of like you can't generalize for the entire, all those individuals that want to be goalies out there. But I think it's really important that parents and kids understand that, being able to play all positions in hockey is so, so important to your development. If you just narrowly focus on one position and you only see the game and experience the game from one position, you're blocking out all these opportunities to learn about the game as a whole. And so I think the rhetoric now, which is really exciting to hear that it's kind of evolved a little bit, is that, it's okay if goalies aren't quote unquote full time till they're 11, 12, 13, 14 years old. There's no exact perfect time for a goalie to transition from part time, to full time. Like I said, it depends on a lot of different things, but the rhetoric is changing. And I think coaches at all levels are starting to realize the importance of the skating foundation, and not just the skating foundation, but your ability to perceive what's happening in a hockey game. And if you're always looking at it from the same angle, from the same position, again, you're missing out on some key learning opportunities that will happen naturally, during those really impressionable years of 8 to 12. So, me personally, like I would say, you don't need to be a full time goalie till you're 13. Obviously, that's not realistic for a lot of kids. They have the
Yeah.
passion, like you said, they want to be full time goalies at 8 or 9. Hey, that's totally fine. But I think the key for coaches is to have that discussion with that young kid and make sure that you're educating them on the importance of, playing other positions and developing other non-goalie specific skills. And that just doesn't mean, within a hockey rink, it's other sports as well. It's other activities. so crucial to any athlete that wants to, in the future get very specific with one position and master one position. So, that's a little bit of what I think. But I'd love to hear Mike's answer on this
No,
as
I
well.
mean, I agree with you. I think most importantly, it's important to play other sports too. I think a lot of guys get into it at such a young age, and you lose out on some of those athletic abilities that you can build out in other sports, right? A
Yeah,
game understanding. The other thing I think too, which is a challenge, is it's just a really expensive position to play now, right?
I've heard that. Yeah,
And yeah, and I mean, even more so, I know Canada is expensive now, but the United States, it's pretty expensive. So, whereas, a lot of families, they can just go down to the football field or the basketball court, you can practice, soccer field, you can practice. So it is tough. It does take, a certain kind of situation to be able to just go in and play. And there's so much coaching now, and there's a lot of different things. And I think one of the most important things as far as like a parent's mindset should be is is understanding or redefining winning. So what does winning mean to you? Are you playing this game? Are you playing this position just so you can try to get as high as you can? Or are you playing it knowing that all those valuable skills that you're going to learn are going to help you in whatever you're going to do in life, right? You made, the comment before that regardless if you're a hockey player or not, you'd be interested in the books, and that's 100% true, right? Because it's the thing that we get from goaltending, the thing that we get from hockey, is to learn certain skill sets that a lot of other people just don't have, even when they're adults, right? And if that can be the new definition of winning, right? If your kid can get through high school, stay focused, you know, whether he plays junior or she plays college, whatever it is, how far you get, you still know that you picked up these unbelievable life skills that are going to help you in whatever you do. And I think that's the most important thing for people to kind of recognize. And then, as Justin said, as far as when you go full time, I think it's different for every kid. I think it's different for every kid. Some kids just don't want to do anything else, and some kids, some of the Europeans, they're playing soccer in summertime. They're playing, they're just complete athletes. So I think there's no perfect one size fit all kind of answer to that.
what are some of the other activities that you might recommend? Like if you guys were sitting on a plane and the person beside you said, "Hey, I'm a goalie parent. My child's 9, 10 years old. What other things could I do to supplement their development? Not because you're trying to develop them to be an NHL goalie, but just to support them."
Yeah,
I think the obvious thing is you'd say be a soccer goalie, be a back catcher, but I could also see where there would be other activities that might be equally, if not more, complementary.
100%. I think it's anything. It's pickleball. It's anything that has to do with any type of athleticism, right? And like I mentioned before, it's a game understanding how games work, how you basically recognize patterns, right? And you can do that in a lot of things because as a goalie, you're standing back there and all you're doing is you're connecting dots, you're reading patterns. And that happens in every game that you play, right? The three of us could go out and make up a game right now. There's still going to be patterns within that game that you're going to start picking up. So I think that's important to realize that, I don't think it's just, hey, you're a goalie, so you should be a soccer goalie, you should be a field hockey goalie, right? It's anything that, you have to use some type of athleticism for. And to be honest, too, I also think that there's a lot of other areas, whether it's instruments as well. I think that's huge as well, and it's learning, right? And that learning portion is something that over time it's like, okay, cool. Now I have a new challenge in hockey. How quickly do I have the ability to learn? And the guys that we've worked with, that I've worked with at the highest level, even at the NHL, they have this ability to learn quickly and be able to not only learn, but implement those skills into their game as well. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And a friend of mine up here, Paul Fricker, is the goalie coach of the Vancouver Giants, and I know one of the things he encourages his goalies to. I mean, you talk about the musical instruments. Specifically, he's a big advocate for the drums because it develops that. You got to be moving all your limbs at the same time. And at first I was like, "What are you talking about?" But then when I thought about it, I'm like, "Yeah, that makes all kinds of sense." I've also long thought this, and again, I think it's reinforced with the interviews that you do in the book. There seems to be a consistency where these elite goalies have a habit or passion that would take their mind off the game. And I mean, you guys, and again, you guys call out so much. You talk about social media and just how, this position can be all encompassing now for a young person. And, I could see equal values both in the physical and mental when it comes to having, an outlet, be it another sport or an activity like music, etc.
Yeah, I mean, some of the best goalies also have the shortest memories, right? Like I had one guy that I worked with, Marty Turco, and Marty used to be the game was over and the game literally left his mind, right? Maybe a few minutes he thought about it, and then when he left, it was gone. I was totally different. I could not let a game go, right? It sat with me until the next game, especially if it was a loss, and that's not a good thing. So a lot of things like having other passions really helps you because now you can just kind of switch your mindset. I think it's harder these days too because before Justin was the OG of goalie talk on Twitter. Now there's thousands of people that are dissecting and being the Monday morning quarterbacks for for somebody's performance, and that's tough. It's tougher to get away. So I think the people that I'll give you another great example. Tim Thomas was one of these guys where he would just be locked in. And when it was, when he was playing in Sweden, this actually comes up in our book, because we were playing in Sweden, and I had known Timmy. I'd played against him in college. We had the
Yeah.
same agent, a guy named Billy Zito, who's the GM for Florida,
No kidding.
and we played in the American League together, and then all of a sudden Timmy went over to play in for a team called AIK in Stockholm.
Yeah.
So he was there and he was kicking butt. And then the next year he was going to go over to Finland, and I was going over to Sweden now, and I was basically going to jump in where Timmy was. And I asked Timmy, I said, how was Stockholm? All my family is from Sweden, but I just was curious of what his thought was. And he goes, I don't really know. He goes, I was just so laser focused. And that's what Timmy is. Timmy would go into a situation and he had the ability to just lock in and be focused on that environment that
A
he was in.
racehorse with the blinders on.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
literally now it's off to Finland and he's locked in there. When he's in the American League, he's locked in there. And when he's in the NHL, he's locked in. And then when he moves on and he's out of the NHL, hockey's gone, right? Like he didn't even think about it. Couldn't even have conversations with him on it because he was now focused in something different, right? And that was a skill set. I don't know if that's something you're born with or it's something that you develop over time, but his ability to focus in, dial in on what he was trying to do was in a different world. And I don't know where that came from.
Well, I'll tell you what, I want to circle back on that concept of, being hyper focused, but then being able to let things go. But so I went through this exercise last night when I was preparing for this conversation. So I went on NHL.com. I looked at goalie stats and I said, okay, I got to figure out what stat am I going to go with. And I chose wins for just arbitrarily. And I said, okay, I'm going to look at the top 10 goalies in the NHL right now by wins in this case and see what can I figure out from I guess an outsider's perspective of what might connect or what might be some traits that you would need to be an elite goaltender. And in hindsight, I probably should have pumped all their names into, chat GPT to figure out if they had a better answer, but it blew me away. The cross section in experiences on where these goalies come from. You've got two free agents that weren't even drafted. Logan Thompson. I didn't know that Sergei Bobrovsky was never drafted. I just learned that last night, which was fascinating. And I put myself in the shoes of a young goalie, and if I'm looking up and I'm saying, okay, what should I be focused on? What experiences should I be acquiring? That might be, a little bit muddy. Um, but I'd be curious to know this, if and I'd love for each of you to take a turn at this. If you were advising an NHL team or the scouting department of an NHL team to say, here's the profile that we want to look for in goaltenders, and here's maybe some experiences or things that we'd view favorably that are maybe outside of the things that you can measure, i.e., save percentage, goals against, etc. You know, can you summarize that? And maybe Justin, start with you. Put you on the spot.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say, and this is again credit to all the individuals I've been fortunate enough to call a mentor, guys like Mike, Mitch, all the coaches we've interviewed in the book. First thing is competitiveness. Like, do you have the fire to compete every single rep, every single practice, every single day you show up to the rink? I
How do you
think
measure that? How do you measure that? Like, is that a statistic, or is that like you just got to be in the building and you got to see it?
yeah, I think it's something that you observe, and it's something that, what drives an individual, what motivates an individual is different. It's different for every goalie. There's so many good stories in the book. I'll never forget the story when we interviewed Connor Hellebuck. And what motivated him to compete and practice every day is knowing that if he won his next game, he was going to get the next day to go out and fish. So we talk about like doing other things and getting up, in balance and stuff like that. That's what drove Connor. He loves to fish. We've seen the stories about him talking about that's his favorite activity away from hockey. And he found what motivated him. And he had that discussion with his coach, and it turned up his performance a notch. And that's why he's one of the best goalies in the game right now. And clearly has a chance to win another Vezina trophy. So there's a lot of ways you can define competitiveness. There's a lot of ways that you can see it in individuals. But when it comes to what makes all these NHL goalies, what makes one NHL goalie better than the other, I think it's just that willingness and that fire to compete and not, they hate pucks in the net. And there's a lot of stories we have in the books that talk about goalies that just hate the idea of a puck in their net. They will do whatever it takes to make sure their, players on their team or in games, they're not getting scored on. And I think there's at least 5 or 6 really good stories in goalies that we've interviewed where that's their determining X factor. That's what they define as what separated them from other goalies around them that maybe were more skilled, maybe were bigger, maybe were drafted higher, had more exposure at a younger age. But that fire, and that's why we call the series The Power Within, like it comes from inside of you. It can't be easily defined, but it's the ability to compete and keep pucks out of the net when nobody is maybe looking.
Before I pass it off to Mike, I just want to share one of my favorite excerpts in the book on that topic was Mitch Korn talking about Dominic Hasek. And,
100%.
again, you kind of, you lose things in time, but, it really brought me back. You forget that like Dominic Hasek, maybe the best goalie of all time, gets passed over in Chicago. They talk about, wasn't aware of this. He mentions that there was 2 teams that could have picked him up. I think it was in the expansion draft, maybe, or they could have traded for him and they passed on him. But again, I think just reinforces that, despite all of that, that burning desire to compete was clearly always there. Mike, how any further insights on that?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One is opportunity, right? There's a
Sure.
lot of great goalies that we've never heard of because they didn't get the opportunity, right? So unfortunately, that plays a big part of it, right? The environment that you're placed in, the opportunities that you get. When you get that opportunity, maybe with a higher level play, right? You naturally start getting better and better and better, right? So there's still a lot of that. Getting the chance, having the confidence from your management to give you a chance when you're 23 years old to play some games, right? Um, so that there's always going to be that equation. The other thing is, I'll give you an example. So I was one of the last things I did in Dallas was draft Jake Ottinger, and I would go out and watch Jake play in college and at these world championships and U18s, and I look at Jake and you know I'm not a big fan of taking goalies in the first round. I'm just not, right? Because it takes such time. By the time you draft them to the time that they're ready, usually a team has already given up on them. So it's that second or third team that sees the benefit of that, right? Look at a guy like Markstrom. right? Same thing there. But when I was looking at Jake, I was like, okay, this kid has all the things that you look for, right? A competitive guy that Justin was talking about. Um, you have the size, the ability, how he reads the game. But one of the things that I liked the most about him was that he wasn't in a rush to get somewhere. He was focused on where he was. And he says one of the best quotes that I've heard. He says, I always try to make sure that he goes, I say to myself, be where your feet are. If my feet are in the American League, my head is in the American League, right? If
Yeah.
my feet are in the NHL, I'm in the NHL. Whereas most people, their feet are in the American League, but their head might be in the NHL. Or your feet might be at junior A and your head's already in college, right? So the ability to do that and not only do it but actually live it is pretty unique. And we all want to try to be somewhere that we might not be at yet, right? So, and I was one of those when I played. When I was in junior A in Chilliwack, I wanted to be in college. When I got to college, I wanted to be in the NHL. So, really the only time I was happy was my call up to the NHL, right? Um, so I think it's one of those things that if you can just be the goalie that focuses on the task at hand and doesn't try to sort out all the things that you do not have control of. You don't have control of your environment. You don't have control of, well, most of your environment. You don't have control of what management's thinking. You don't have control of the team you're playing against, the system that's in front of you. Um, there's a lot of things as a goalie you don't have control of. But what you do have control of is your ability to focus on what you can do best, right? And if you can do that consistently, chances are it's going to work out in your favor. Jake had that ability, right? And I think that's why you start seeing guys at the age of 25, 26. That's when their breakthrough is, because they've gone through so many ups and downs. And finally, they put their hands up in the air and they're like, I'm done. I'm done trying to figure this thing out. I'm just going to go play the game, right? And some days it's going to be fantastic. And some days the first shot's going to go off this defenseman's skate and go in. I have no control of that, right? So I just consistently try to go out and do one thing, and that's to make the next save, the next shot. And that's the ability that some of those elite guys have.
Again, um, you know, sub out the word goalie with the word player or any other vocation, and I think the same principles apply. Again, and just to follow up on that, one of my favorite passages from the book is Brian Elliott, who another Wisconsin alum, and he talks about how his first 2 years at Wisconsin, he didn't really play, and then his dad calls him and says, "Hey, the Kitchener Rangers want you, and if you go there, you can start playing right away." And he talks about how, yeah, at that stage of life, and again, this is so unique. Um, he talks about, hey, like I was so happy to get the scholarship. If all I got was the education, I was cool with that. But he said I also understood that there was a process, and that in Wisconsin, you don't play your first 2 years, but then if things line up, you should kind of get a 2-year run where you own the net. Um, and I just look at the environment that we're in today, just for players in general. Like, nobody really needs to go through any adversity anymore, because you can just go to the next team. You can go to the portal. If things aren't working out with your community team, you go to the next thing. So I think that, it's so important that we amplify stories like that in our sport right now, not just for goalies, for everybody, because I think that does apply that, and I would go so far as, in the time that we've done this podcast, the most consistent story that we hear from, the coaches that we interview is, how many NHL coaches started in the East Coast Hockey League, and when they were there, they loved it. They had there was joy, they were present, and they just did the best they could. Or, as Mike, you said it, just be where your feet are. Um, I wonder too, the one thing that's unique about the goalie position, and I really thought about this a lot, was that if you're, unlike other players in our sport, if you're a goalie coach, good chance that you're going to develop, hopefully develop a relationship with your goalie coach that's likely different than the relationship that most players would have with their coaches. And that, again, Mike, you touched on it, that it's, some things you can't control, like your environment. Like if you're fortunate that you make that right connection at a young age, like God, that relationship would just be invaluable. And so part of the reason I bring this up is yesterday I'm out on a run and do you guys listen to the Kelsey Brothers podcast at all?
Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes. So they had Jason Sudeikis on last week. And
Yeah.
so you've got Jason Kelsey talking about, he's like, here's a Super Bowl champion, played in the league for a long time. And he talks about, he goes, I love this show because Ted Lasso is the coach that I wanted to play for. And he goes, so much of what he did wasn't about what happened on the field. It was about supporting the players away from the field. And I think that that's maybe one of the benefits that goaltenders get if they're fortunate to have that relationship, just because, maybe the nature of it is different than what, players have with their, the regular coaching staff, I guess. My question is this: is there something that um, that we can learn as just a general sort of hockey coaching population? What can we learn from goalie coaches, maybe specifically to that relationship and the influence that it has on player development and performance?
I think I'll jump in this one first, Justin. So I think that, again, this is going to be like the pendulum, right? So in the beginning, it was, or, when I stepped into the league, I think Mitch and I we were one of the few teams that we had two guys, right? And there wasn't a lot of American League goalie coaches, at least not full time. And so you have these goalie coaches that were in there, and originally it would be like the coaching staff and kind of the goalie coach on the side. We can have these conversations with our goalies, and the goalies could trust us that that conversation wasn't necessarily going to end up in the coaching room, right? And then it kind of evolved where goalie coaches are now, and part of all the meetings, the power play, penalty kill. You're an assistant coach, right? And so yes, the goalie coach could be there and listen to you and talk about life and your issues. And that's a big, big part of being able to extract performance, because that's what a job of goalie coach is to extract performance, right? And help you play as good as you can. Now, what happens sometimes is that pendulum swings too much. Now you've become the warm blanket for the goalie, right? When the puck drops and I'm sitting in the press box, I can't play the game for you, right? You can't think, oh, what would my goalie coach have done? And Sean Burke says this so well. He says, he goes, I don't want my goalie thinking, what would my goalie coach wanted in this situation? Because if we have them think like that, that means we've done something wrong. We can't be that warm blanket. They have to realize they have to take control of their game. I make this analogy a lot. I say it's kind of like a Formula One racer. So they come to the pit and you have all people that have different roles with that vehicle, right? And the goalie coach is one of them. Now, as soon as that car leaves pit road, it's just the driver in the car, right? That's, you have to drive. As soon as the puck drops, you have to play the game, right? So, the warm, nice conversations about life are good and can help you mentally get to the right spot. However, we also need a little bit of that mental, let's call it mental toughness, right? Where you have the ability that you realize you take ownership of your game. Now, Bill Ranford and I have had these conversations a ton where we said, sometimes the goalie coach can be around too much. Now, all of a sudden, it's your warm blanket all the time. And when the warm blanket disappears,
Interesting.
now
Yeah.
you're in trouble, right? So sometimes it's better that you go in for 2 weeks or you're with the organization for 2, 3 weeks, and then you leave. And then the goalie has to manage his own game. And, I know even Dave Alexander, who I've worked a lot with, he said too, he goes, sometimes I would do a test. If I didn't go out there early, 20 minutes before practice and set up the drills, what would the goalie do? Would you just sit there and look around and wait,
Yeah.
like a nice little puppy waiting for his owner to come? Or does he take ownership and actually set up the drills, right? So again, there's a fine balance. Yes, we want the, nice fireside chats, but at the same time, you have to realize that you are paid, at least in the NHL, you are paid to execute. You are paid to go out and stop pucks and help win games, give your team a chance to win. So again, I think as if you let go of that power and you're too dependent on others, you're never going to be as good as you can be, right? So do you see what I
Great
mean with
insight.
that pendulum,
Yeah.
right?
The,
So
the pendulum
yeah,
is one of the best philosophies or theories that I've ever heard in the position in my entire life. It really does account for a lot. And I would piggyback off of what Mike said with a quote that pops up in the newest book that I learned from a Swedish goalie coach in Sweden, and he said the greatest gift I can give my goalies is the gift of self awareness. And when I heard that, I was just like, that is so perfect. And I think that's what Mike's kind of speaking to in terms of this pendulum swinging back with goalie coaches. Is like we became so involved. Our goalie coaches at the highest levels became so involved in the day to day operations and making sure that the goalies were ready that the goalies lost that sense of autonomy a little bit. And when we talk about autonomous supportive coaching and we look at the research, it's like finding that, like I said earlier, like what's the actual motivation behind why this goalie wants to be great. And when we put the onus on the individual and that goalie has the opportunity to autonomously, find that motivation and run with it, that's where we see learning and success really flourish. So that quote to me was like, we had as soon as I heard it, I was like, that's going in the book. I don't care, it's going to find its way in there because I think it really does encompass where goalie coaching is finally starting to take strides. And that is taking a step back a little bit, observing and allowing the goalies to navigate. And self-navigation we know is so crucial for, early development in athletes and all individuals. And I think it's becoming more relevant and more prevalent with these elite performers, again, being able to guide themselves to where they need to go in order to have that success or find that inner motivation, find that inner fire. So, yeah, that quote pops up in the book. I absolutely love it. The greatest gift you can give your goalies is the gift of self awareness. And I truly believe that.
Well, what's interesting, guys. Like one of the notes I took, and I don't think it's said explicitly or framed this way in the book, but one of the notes I took is that the one thing that good goalies develop is they learn how to have really productive conversations with themselves, and that probably starts with having a productive conversation with their coach. But that baton gets passed off, and so with that in mind, I want to share. This is kind of my a bit of a personal story. So I started coaching the BCHL. I was 20 years old, and I can remember early on, Jason Montgomery was our goalie. We were playing somewhere, and I saw something in the game a goalie let in. So I go in between periods, and I'm like, "This is kind of what I saw and what I think you could do." And I go back in the coach's office, and our head coach goes, "What were you just doing?" And I was like, "Oh, I just talked to Monty and was talking about the goalie." He's like, "What the f- are you doing? You can't talk to a goalie during a game. Are you crazy?" And I'm like, "Oh, geez, like I just thought because there was." He's like, "No, you do not talk to goalies during a game." Fast forward 8 years from there, and so that was the lesson I learned. You just do not talk to goalies before a game, during a game. Maybe after the game you pat them on the back, but if they don't play well, like that's also an equally dicey situation. So fast forward 8 years, I'm in Penticton, also in the BCHL. Our goalie's Alex Even. And we play a game, and it's like the next practice. Again, I had observed something, so I chat with them in practice, and couldn't tell you what I said, but I said, "Hey, I saw this in the game and thought this might be helpful." He's like, "Yeah, that's actually really good. Why didn't you come and tell me that like between periods?" And I'm like, "Oh, because it was it's the game and we shouldn't talk." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "That would have been so helpful to hear that between periods." And so, can you guys maybe? I'd love to get both of your takes on this. Like, for any coaches, non-goalie coaches that are listening, any recommendations in maybe how they structure communication with their goalies?
yeah. I think that again, it's going to be different for everybody, right? I had Kari Lettinen who would want to talk to me before the game and between each period, and we tried to have him not do that, but that was just his thing that made him comfortable, right? Um, my mistake with Kari, although he was very, very good for us for a very, very long time, was I think he did become too dependent on me. And I was young enough where I didn't recognize where that should have, you know, maybe had more of a space, right? Because to get him to the next level, I really would need to get a goalie that didn't matter if I'm there or not, right? But as coaches, sometimes we make it feel good that, they need us, right? They need me around. Um, but I think every time that you go speak with an athlete, there should be a purpose, right? You should have something of value to share with them. Um, and in that case that you made as an example, your later one in Penticton, yeah, that might have been one of those cases where that would have worked, right? Um, Again, I think every goalie is different. Every player is different. Obviously, now the younger players, they crave more information. They want that information. If we take, players of the old, right? They didn't need that. But now, I would have the players. Tyler Seguin would be asking questions about the other goalie, the opposing goalie. They want that information. Again, I think there's a fine balance. I think it depends on the goalie, and it kind of depends on what your head coach wants as well, right? He's the one that's kind of steering the ship and setting the tone. That you have to kind of respect that as well of what they want. Um, for me, about like team and team building and so forth, I've been lucky. Just like we said before, playing multiple sports, I think you can learn from other facets in life. And being down here in Dallas, I've been lucky enough to spend a lot of time with different Navy SEALs, and I've worked in some businesses with them. And you kind of learn their mentality as well, and what makes them really good. And they have the same challenges that we as hockey players have, right? We as humans have. Everybody has the same thing going on in your mind, right? We all have the same life problems. However, again, I'll use the word execute. When it's time to execute, they have the ability to switch their mind just like that and focus on the job they need to do, go do that job, and then when they get out of it, they just kind of pop out of it again. They have mastered that. And, if you have an athlete that is in that zone and can dial in that and be that focused, if you're now providing him with some information at an untimely manner, that might get them to pop out of that zone as well. So
Yeah.
I think that everybody is different. And, think about it when, we're sitting now in front of our computers. And when you get in that flow state and you're working, and you got your music and you're just kicking butt, and then all of a sudden, boom, you get a text or a phone call, and you take it, that pops you out of it as well, right? So again, I think there's just so many different scenarios that we face, that is the best coaches have a really good gut feeling for when to jump in and when to stay out. And you know yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I no better person to answer that question than Mike because of his years of experience, working with NHL goalies. But from my perspective, I think um, I like to use this quote: "Alignment is the wellspring of intent," and it does take really good timing. Like you have to know your goalies, you have to know when they're receptive and when they're not. And that's part of being a good coach is observing and being able to understand different patterns that exist within your athletes.
Yeah.
But I think it's also just the understanding that there are clearly times when a goalie or an athlete may be more sensitive to receiving information than others. And again, research and empathy based design and empathy based coaching is, for me, if I had that opportunity, it would be asking the goalie what they experienced first before I tell the goalie what I saw from my perspective.
Love that.
And so I think that's extremely important when you're developing relationships with goalies at any age, any level, is let them tell you their experience first so that you have the opportunity to listen genuinely and authentically. And then as the coach, you give your observation on what was experienced firsthand by the athlete. And it's a little thing, but I just think that's naturally, where coaches should start is just let the individual, regardless of the situation or where that individual's at or level, none of that stuff really matters. What matters is, are you exhibiting the ability to learn and listen to what your athlete has to say? And if they have the opportunity to share their side or their story or what they saw or what they experienced first, I always feel like that's going to help build that relationship. And then naturally over time, you start to find that alignment between what you see and what your goalies actually experience. And that's the wellspring of intent. And that's where you start to see success, and you start to see, cohesion between relationships with goalies and athletes. So like it's a simple thing, but that's always where I start, is like focus on the empathy first, let your athlete tell you what they experience, and then go from there, as opposed to me stepping in and being like, this is what I saw, you could have done X, Y, or Z, blah, 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 blah. So that's just something I would piggyback off what Mike said.
Love that. And again, I know I sound like a broken record, but again, advice that lends itself to, coaches of any sport, any position. Mike, you talk about flow. You guys have you have a Venn diagram in the book,
Yes.
and it's an intersection. So it's got the circles, and it says mind, body. So those words, hear those a lot. And we hear a lot of the same coaching jargon floated around on this show in particular over and over again. But the third bit was spirit. And I read that and I'm like, man, I started thinking back. I'm like, I haven't heard a lot of coaches talk about spirit. And what I love especially is your definition of it. And it is that the spirit fills the space between your body and mind and serves as the ultimate control center for your feelings. Every athlete has feelings. And as coaches, if we think that those feelings don't influence performance on the rink, the court, the field, we're kidding ourselves. I wonder if you can maybe take me inside, Mike, a conversation that you might have with a goalie about spirit and how that can be leveraged, or perhaps how they can harness that.
As much as I appreciate you asking me that first, this is Justin. This is what makes him
Justin's domain. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
Justin, okay, you got an
I'm
assist
gonna let
there.
you
Well,
answer this.
I mean,
Yeah.
so to me, like, your inner voice is so powerful. We know that, right? Like the words that you speak to yourself are so powerful. And Mike and I had the opportunity to work with another individual who was very spiritually focused, and he taught us the power of, the words that you speak to yourself, how they affect your actions, your beliefs, the way that you project yourself to other people, the type of confidence that you display. And we all know that some of the best goalies out there have this tremendous swagger, and like that was one of the things that came up in Jeremy Swayman's chapter in the newest book. And Mike and Jeremy and
a lot
his
of swagger this weekend.
Yeah, exactly. Like I was so excited to see those guys go down, like Darcy and Jeremy go toe to toe, but
Yeah.
refs didn't let it happen. But anyways, like I think a lot of goalies find the confidence and the passion to play this position and continue through the journey and go through the highs and lows from the inner faith that they have and their ability to be the best regardless of what's going on around them. And that to me is what spirit is. It's that internal fire. Everyone's got it inside them. They all find passion. And one of the things I learned at an early age is that passion promotes success. Again, doesn't matter what obstacles are in your way. If you have that passion to be great at something, you're going to find a way to problem solve. You're going to find a way to navigate. You're going to find a way to absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what we mean by spirit. It's just that inner drive. It's that inner voice inside of you that helps guide you and helps you, again, solve problems and find ways to stop pucks when maybe other goalies are just a little bit off their game, or maybe don't have that swagger, maybe feel like they're missing a piece of the puzzle. That inner fire and that spirit and that willingness to do whatever it takes, regardless of what people say, regardless of your external circumstances, is I think what we're getting at.
Well, see, I told you he'd nail it.
I practiced a little bit.
Amazing. So I'm going to try and lob up a softball here for you, Mike. So you talk about the spirit, and then this was one part where I left the book and I was like, I'm not sure if I landed clearly in my head, maybe where I was supposed to, and it was about ego. And I would say, I think coaches love good quotes. This book is full of great quotes. I got the highlighter still attached to it. But you talk about letting go of your ego. It's a great quote that you guys have here. True humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less. And we hear that all the time. You can't have an ego. I paused and I thought, okay, when we look at other positions in sport where maybe the spotlight is very clearly on one specific athlete within the game. I think about a relief pitcher in baseball. Like, they don't play classical music when the relief pitcher walks out of the bullpen. Like, it's really clear they're coming in and they've got some swagger. You think about a quarterback in the NFL. Like, they're generally bigger personalities. You think of strikers in soccer or European football. Like, they get documentaries made about them, about like how they live, and the documentaries aren't like low ego. They're just the opposite of that. Ego, swagger, ego, whatever words we want to use. Clearly, there's some importance there, but I can also see where that is just a razor thin line. How do you talk to a young goaltender, or perhaps just a young athlete in general, and help them navigate how they walk that line?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because you're 100% right. I'll give you a quick story. So when I was playing hockey in Sweden, I had injured my groin, and I had to go this place in Stockholm to do rehab. And in comes this one young kid that's gonna spend the week with me doing rehab. It's a soccer player, and he came up and had that swagger, but man, also a massive ego. And he said something to the fact, I went up and introduced myself, and he goes, "Hi, my name is Zlatan, and I'm going to be the best soccer player in the world." So I was Zlatan Ibrahimovic, and
Come on.
got to spend the week with him, and we were doing, he's a young guy because he's a Swedish guy, right? And he was also doing rehab. And there's something about him, you just knew that, like, this guy, it's not ego. He's not saying it in a way that he doesn't believe it. He believes every word that's coming out of his mouth. I will be the best soccer player in the world, right? But he also puts his words to work. And that's a quote that, I got from one of my Navy SEAL buddies. He'd always say, like, you have to go out there and put your words to work. And Zlatan would do that. Zlatan had a massive ego, but he believed it as well, right?
Yeah.
So there's sometimes, you're 100% right, where that ego is something that can drive you to a whole different level. Slatton gets to LA, takes a one-page paper out in the LA Times that
Oh yeah, I
says,
remember
"Dear LA, you're welcome," right? Slatton. And like, that is
So good.
That's amazing.
that is the one time that I've felt it and been like, boom, like, whoa. The other time that I've felt swagger more than anything else was, I was playing in the SHL, and there was this junior team playing before our game, before the division or the SHL game, and it was a junior team called Frölunda, which is team down south, and they were in Leksand playing against Leksand, and out comes this goalie that's going to play the junior game. Man, just the way he moved, the way he wore his gear, just the way, like, he almost knew that everybody was looking at him. He
Oh,
was
I
the
think I know
show.
where this is going. I want to. Yeah.
I said, God, I don't know, man. I'm playing in this pro level game right now, and here's the junior game before me. This kid's freaking good. I can just tell. I haven't even seen him stomp the puck yet, but he is good. And that was Henrik Lundqvist.
Nailed it. Oh,
And
amazing. Yeah.
yeah, and that year, Henrik played so good in juniors. In the playoffs, towards the end, a guy named Petter Rundqvist, who was the starting goalie, he had gotten hurt, and Lundqvist came in and dominated, and just
Really.
carried that swagger that he had in juniors on to the next thing. And that is this sense of belief that somebody has in themselves, and call it ego if we want, that is so good. However, as powerful and mighty as Slatan is and Henrik is, guess what? Their ability to want to learn, their hunger for learning, there is no ego. It's almost like, my job is to figure out what I can learn from you, take what's good, leave what's not good, and put the good stuff in my game and move on, right? But they don't walk around, they walk around again with this, call it this ego, right? However, on the inside, they're still trying to learn, adapt, grow. There's not a day that these guys didn't wake up figuring out how can I get better, right? And so there is a real good fine balance, and your thought process on that, you were 100% right.
Justin, you got something else
That
for that?
was, yeah, I think, it's such a good question. And again, it's different for every individual. And it's hard to know sometimes when someone's being too cocky or it is just swagger. But I think there's also a sense of, internally, are they assuming things? And when you assume that you have a certain talent level or you assume that you've learned it all, that's where I think it crosses the line into being, having too much of an ego. And another thing is ego is something that teammates and coaches pick up on. They can sense when, there's a little bit of an iron curtain there and you're assuming that you work your hardest, but your actions don't match up with the confidence that you have. So I think that's another part of it as well, is like, is there any part of you that's just trying to, you're assuming that you've put in the work, you're assuming that you've learned everything you've had to learn. And you can see that in athletes. When athletes feel closed off or when they're not receptive to listening to what a coach has to say in between periods or after a game. And so I think it's something that, again, like one of the things that I notice in some of these goalies that we've talked to, where I see, the quiet confidence and the swagger and not the ego, is their ability to unlearn things. So it's not just the necessarily like you're learning new things all the time, but it's also like, hey, you get to a certain point in your career, you're going to have to unlearn some things in order to take that next step. And if you don't have that ego and you have that willingness to let go of things that have worked for you up to a certain point in your career, and you can let go of that and take something new and add it to your game. And we've seen so many examples of this in Madison. The best example to me was when Jimmy Howard came out.
Jimmy Howard, yeah.
Jimmy Howard was an unbelievable example of this because here was a guy who had already played in the NHL for 8 or 9 years, clearly had a lot of skill, knew what he was doing in every situation, but had not incorporated the RVH into his game. So what does
Didn't
he
even
do?
know what it was.
Didn't even know. He was like,
Really?
what's the art? Like, what are you even talking about? So here's a guy that, again, already had a 8 or 9, 10 year career, comes to a summer camp by his own choosing. This wasn't something that was forced upon him. He made the conscious decision to spend a week in Madison with goalie coaches at a high level to train and incorporate something new to his game. To me, that was like quiet confidence and that was swagger because he was willing to admit that, yes, things have worked to him up to a certain point, but if he was going to take the next step and he wanted to extend his career another 3 or 4 or 5 years, he had to let go of some things that he had held on to and he had to learn something new. And to me, that's swagger, that's confidence. And it doesn't always look the same for every goalie. But to me, that was like, man, this guy, that's unbelievable to have someone willing to do that in their, I think he was in his early 30s, mid 30s at that time. So to me, it's not necessarily just, all these obvious things. It's like the willingness to unlearn and say, yes, I can still get better. Yes, I can take pieces of my game and eliminate them and add other pieces that might actually make me better. And so that's, I just wanted to add that because I think that's something that Mike and I have drawn out of a lot of goalies in the books, but we've also seen it firsthand at some of the camps that he ran in Madison.
Yeah, well, we can't all get by on the heater. Sometimes we need to develop an off-speed pitch too. So I think I think this all kind of funnels into confidence. And I would say if there's, if we were to poll all the coaches listening right now and said like, what's the one characteristic you want in your goalie? They'd probably say, I just want a confident goalie. Like I want to walk in the room because if they're confident, the players are going to feed off that, and I'm likely going to have a confident team. But you use this example in the book of the Empire State Building and how the foundation of the Empire State Building is 55 feet into the ground. And, obviously we don't see that, and that there's some correlations to how confidence is built. And I think that, one thing that I have certainly observed in the people that we get access to at the coaches site is that all too often there's gimmicks to confidence. It's like you read this one book, or you reframe things this one way, or you go get this one experience and poof, you're going to be confident. But, going back to that list of the top 10 goalies right now in the NHL, there's Logan Thompson. And, if you didn't know squat about hockey and you looked up, Logan Thompson's background on Wikipedia, before you got to the part that he made it into the NHL, there'd be more reasons to think of why he shouldn't be confident to why he has the confidence to, lead the number one team in the National Hockey League right now. Again, just going through the book, the one thing again, just that was on my notes and really stood out to me is that, it reframed my own maybe belief system, and that confidence has more to do with um, developing the right habits. And confidence, it's more important to have confidence in those habits, and that over time they're going to lead you to a goal that's probably undefined, but having confidence that it's going to take you to a good place versus saying, I'm doing these things because they're attached to an outcome. And so would love to hear your thoughts on confidence, because again, I think that I really put my parent hat on there, and I'm like, man, like, you know, these things, these are invaluable skills for young people, all of us, frankly.
Yeah. For me, it's pretty simple. Confidence is earned. That's it.
Yeah.
Confidence is earned through hard work,
Yeah.
right? And it's pretty simple. If a guy has a bad game, I'm not confident anymore. Well, why? Are you doubting the hard work that you've put in the last decade? Right?
Yeah.
Confidence just doesn't disappear overnight, right? Um, it really doesn't, because if you understand where it's from, right, you can be confident when you go in and write an exam because you've studied and you've put in the work, you've gone to your classes and you're ready to go, right? You can be confident when you step in the crease because you've done the extra things that you need to do, not just the things that you were supposed to do, the extra things that you put in when nobody else was looking, right? The ability to be able to be confident is, again, something that can't some people can fake and say I'm confident, but they know they've taken shortcuts. Stu Barnes, who I coached with in Dallas, he used to always say the game will always put you back in your place, right? And it's such a good saying, because like, if
That's
you
such a
cheated,
great
if you cheated the game, the game knows. The game will put you back in your place. You can go in and be good for a short period of time, right? But if you cheated the game again, eventually you'll find your place back where you belong,
You guys should
right?
do a book on quotes, by the way. I just want to throw that
So confidence really is just putting in the work, right? If you've done that,
Yeah.
you can always fall back to that. And that's what we mean by that foundation. That foundation is rock hard. You can't fake that, right? If you put in the hard work, you can always just know that, like, hey, that's my foundation. My foundation is strong. I just have to trust it. That's it.
What's the awesome quote from Jeremy Swayman's chapter that he learned from Alfie? It was the
Yeah, it's like
sun
you
comes
can't.
up the sun comes up tomorrow. The sun comes
Yeah,
up
didn't he
tomorrow,
also
right?
say
So
you can't buy swagger at Target? I think he
yeah,
said.
that was a really good one. Yeah, you can't buy swagger. You can't buy swagger confidence at Target, which was an awesome one. So that points to like what Mike was saying, is that it's earned. But then he had another really good quote later on, and it was something that Alfie Michaud, who was his goalie coach at the University of Maine. So this was the first, a little bit of context for in the Power Within 3, which is the newest one that came out. For the first time ever, we interviewed, an NHL goalie and a goalie coach that he had worked with previously. So it was our first time, discussing with, having three people discuss the journey together. And it was so cool when I'm going through and editing the book and listening to the interview that Mike had with Alfie and Jeremy. And Alfie, at one point says, the sun comes up tomorrow. And Jeremy said, oh, I got goosebumps hearing that quote, because it was so important to him in college that, like Mike said, just because Jeremy may have had one bad game and then you've got to practice for 4 days before the next game, like the sun always comes up tomorrow. You always have an opportunity the next day to reprove yourself or to regain that confidence that you may have lost. And so that was a really cool anchor system for Jeremy, that I had never really heard before, that I thought was so cool to know that, like, just a simple quote, like the sun comes up tomorrow. Hey, just because you have one bad game does not mean you're a bad goalie, right? You've got that opportunity the very next day to go out and practice and regain that confidence. That's another thing I noticed too throughout the whole series, how many goalies talked about how they got their confidence back in practice. It didn't happen in games. They didn't need 17,000 people in the stands to cheer when they made a big save. They earned that confidence back in practice by just competing, and they let that spirit drive them. And I thought that was a really cool theme that we saw throughout all the books.
Yeah, and I think you got just the stories that are shared within the book. put so much of an emphasis on practice. And I would say that any coach who reads these are going to pull out some stories that, again, position aside, that they're going to share these with their athletes as those nudges or reminders that, all of us need at times, but just some great ways to communicate those messages. Last one from mine, and I'm going through my notes, and this one was kind of buried at the bottom, but it really resonated with me, and it was partly because I had a similar conversation with somebody that, you know we were making plans, and they said, well, what do you not want to do? And I said, well, I don't want to do this. They said, well, why? Because I'm like, I don't like it. And they're like, well, that's probably why we should do it. And it comes down, I'm trying to remember where I pulled it from, but I just look at my notes, this training things that are uncomfortable, squats versus lunges. And it talks about, like, if all you do is squats and that's what you're comfortable doing, the squats don't maybe have the desired impact if you can't do lunges and you don't work your hamstrings. And I think as I say that, it might've been in the chapter about balance. And I would just, my question be is that it's so easy now, I think, especially for young kids, that you get your favorite skills coach or hockey school and you just go do that because it eventually becomes easy and it's just what you want to do. And like when you go to the driving range, you just want to hit the driver because that's kind of fun and exciting. But what sort of advice, because goaltending is no different than any other position, there's a variety of skills you got to work on and acquire. How would you advise young players to say, you might not get to everything in a year, but here's how you could maybe think about balancing the things that are you gravitate towards that are comfortable, which are still important, but here's how you would think about working on the things that maybe you're not so comfortable with, and then mapping that out over, it could be a month, it could be a season, it could be multiple seasons.
It's interesting. I sometimes do an exercise with goalies and I say, hey, pretend you were the opposing goalie coach and we're going to play you today. So
Oh, this
Aaron,
is
we're
great.
we're,
Yeah.
we're playing you.
Just put the puck on
And
net. That's probably
yeah, exactly. 5 goal. And and so what I want you to do is come up with a list and write a scouting report on you of how would I expose you? How would I score on you? How would I get under your skin? Okay. So now you just got the answers to the test, right? You just got to go study those questions now. So now it's about learning, okay, yeah, in the scouting report, I said, get in this guy's face, give him a little chop because he gets rattled easily, um, or dump the puck in. He doesn't like to get behind the net. Awesome. Wouldn't you just love to have see what's on the wall in the opposing room of how they should score on you, right? Then take that and work on it, right? So by the end of the season, it says, gosh, don't dump it in on Aaron. He gets out there, plays the puck really well, like super good first pass, and they get the puck out of the zone really quickly. You could try to get in his face, but he doesn't get rattled, right? So sometimes one of the best things that you can do is reverse engineer things, right? So now I took what you're weak at and let's start building on those skills, right? And Justin used the word before about self-awareness. And that's really what it is understanding. It's like, cool, if I want to become better than anybody else, right, in whatever field that I do, I'm going right to what I'm weak at, and I'm going to start working on that and make those my strengths, right? And then it's just a constant self-evaluation of yourself. That's what I would do.
Love that.
I think you have to get away from what you already know in order to learn what you don't know. And so that takes a little bit of risk. And that also takes a lot of self awareness because you have to have the inner strength and the discipline to be able to go up to your coach or to be able to go up to some of your teammates and create drills that are going to work on those weaknesses or those things that you're not necessarily good at. So it's kind of all encompassing. It does take not having an ego. You have to be willing to admit to yourself, I really suck on rebounds when there's traffic in front of the net or whatever the case may be. You cannot make excuses for the things that you feel are not contributing to a team's success. And if you can get away from what you know and what you're comfortable with, and learn some things about what you don't know. That's half the battle, is just being able to actually execute um, that level of learning. And I don't see that in a lot. I don't see that autonomy in a lot of younger goalies, and that's really worrisome. That ability to take your own teammates, or not lean on a coach, or not lean on the structure that's already in place where everything's on a silver platter for you, and go out of your comfort zone or do something that's not part of your daily routine. And that is where, again, we talk about balance and spirit and not having an ego. It takes all of those things to be able to do that. Um, that's one of the only reasons I was ever to develop any skill whatsoever, was the fact that I had nothing around me. So I had no other choice than to figure it out on my own. And today I think we're in this culture in youth hockey where young goalies do not have the ability to figure it out on their own. They're expecting someone else to give them the answers. And if that's the way that you develop year after year after year, when push comes to shove and it's really competitive and you have no other choice than to dig deep and find those answers within yourself, you don't have that ability because you've never been forced to do it before. So I think that's a big part of it too, is just, do you have the capacity? Do you have the discipline to speak to yourself without the rose colored glasses on, and do like Mike said, write a scout, evaluate yourself and scout yourself and write down your weaknesses and accept that those weaknesses exist. And then after you've accepted that the weaknesses exist, do you have that discipline? Do you have, that fire inside you to go out and actually work on them and not expect someone else to do it for you? Because it doesn't work like that when you get to the higher levels.
And again, this transcends so much. And I recall it was an interview I listened to recently with Danny McBride, uh, of Righteous Gemstones, Eastbound and Down, and funny guy. But he talked about, the question was, I think, how come he doesn't have social media? And he talks about, he's like, in the creative process, he's like, you can't listen too much, because then you're gonna get pointed in a direction. He goes, my process is, I need to make time to get away and have conversations with myself, evaluate my own ideas, find my own blind spots, figure out what I have to work on. And if things aren't, they got to be logical to me. And so much to be said for that. I would also say, going back to my question about, the profile or scouting report on goaltenders, I obviously do not have anywhere near the breadth of experience that both of you have, but I just know, on what I have seen, my scouting report would be, go find me the goaltender that doesn't look like everybody else, because so much of them play exactly. It's like they're IKEA furniture, um, and that's maybe not a good thing. Uh, Gentlemen, this has been fantastic. I just want to give each of you the opportunity to do two things. You have a platform to speak to a lot of non-goalie coaches in our sport. Any final recommendations, insights that you'd like to share with them, certainly would be appreciated. Also, just when it comes to the books and resources that you've prepared, you also mentioned the camp. I know we're going to get questions about that. So, for anybody that wants to find you, learn about what you're up to, purchase the book, how can they do that? Mike, let's start with you.
Okay, last thing that I'll share with you, and I think this goes for anybody, whether you're a goalie, whether you're in a team environment, whether you're running a business. It's a saying that, rising tides, right, raise all boats, right? And lift all boats. So I think what's so important is that we decide of how can we raise the standards within our organization. When you're a goaltender, how you raise the standard is, I'll give you the example with what Swayman said. He and Allmark, as you saw, became really good buddies, would support each other. They pushed each other so hard. Yeah, they pushed each other so hard in practice, and they always competed. When you compete, now you've raised your standards. Well, what happens now to the forwards? They're raising their standards. What happens to the coaching staff? They're raising their standards. When we raise those standards, that's what happens then. That's when you start winning championships. When you win championships, everybody benefits, right? But it starts from something. What can I do better today to raise the standard within our organization, right? What can I do within my business today to raise the standards within my business, right? So I think that's one of the most important things to do. All these little conversations that we've had with the goaltenders in this book, their tactics, their tools, There are suggestions of what you can do ultimately to raise the standard within yourself, right? So that would be my big thing. If you
Love
want to
that.
find me, if you want to find me, I'm hard to
Good
find.
luck.
So yeah, good luck.
Go Tasco. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So here's one I really love for coaches, and this is for coaches that have never experienced what it means to be a goalie. Go find a VR headset, go find Sense Arena, whatever, VR headset, okay? And be a goalie. Put on the virtual headset and experience what it's like to be a goalie using Sense Arena if you have that opportunity. I think that is one of the best things that a coach can do if they've never had the opportunity to play the position before. Use technology and use VR and see what it actually feels like to give up a goal from the blue line, to give up a goal when there's a body standing right in front of you. I'm very big on empathy-based learning, obviously, as you can tell. And this is one of the best uses for the technology, in my opinion, is that if you've never experienced what it's actually like to put on the gear or to be in net when 6 other guys are buzzing around or 10 or 11 other guys are buzzing around, try and figure out what it's like to experience it so that you can have a better understanding and you can find that alignment with your goalies. Because that is, I think, essentially, especially for a lot of younger goalies that maybe don't have the maturity or have had 15, 20 years of experiencing playing hockey at a high level. That's what they're genuinely seeking on the inside. They just want to be understood. They just want to be understood. And they spend so much time trying to talk to a coach that has never played the position or talk to a parent that's never played the position. By the time that understanding is actually there, they're exhausted. They don't want to talk anymore. So if you can eliminate the barrier of understanding between the goaltender who's experiencing it firsthand and you who have never experienced it before, throw on a headset and try VR, try Sense Arena, it's goalie. Get a little bit of an understanding of what it actually feels like and looks like to see pucks whizzing past you and how bad it can feel when you give up weak goals, for example. And I think if you can start to kind of bridge the gap a little bit and shrink the gap between the understanding, that's where you're going to see a lot more happy goalies and a lot more goalies that just truly love the position, because when they go to explain to the head coach, this is what they saw, this is what they experienced, that gap is a little bit less and that alignment's there. So that's just like one thing I like to do to challenge head coaches is just like, hey, the technology's there now. You can experience what it's like to be a goalie without having to throw on the gear and waste time, valuable ice time to do it. And it goes such a long way because you just have a little bit more empathy for your goaltenders, and that goes a really long way.
Well, I'm going to call Bob Tativa and I'm going to tell him that he's got a spot for this episode right now.
There you go.
The last one, most important point.
Pretty strong endorsement there.
Yeah. Where do we get the book?
You can get all of the books on Amazon. You just type in the title. You can also message either of us. I'm very easy to find. I'm at the Goalie Guild on Twitter and Instagram. For any coaches out there, we wanted to offer like a cool little discount. Any coach that orders more than 10 books of any of the 4 titles, they instantly are going to get 50% off the cost. So we want to help goalie coaches or any coach at any level, get this information, get these awesome resources into their hands. And so Mike and I are offering basically 50% discount on any order of 10 or more copies. Doesn't matter which title it is. We'll make sure we take care of the coaches that reach out and want to make sure their goalies get these books. So otherwise, just Amazon, best place to get them. Super easy.
Okay, so we got Power Within, volumes 1, 2, and 3. We also have Embracing the Grind for anybody that's doing some Googling, following, listening to this. Boys, you rock. Thanks so much for doing this. This was awesome.
Thank you so much for having us. Yeah, really appreciate it.